I consider that a real plus. So so the business has grown from just 2 or 3 of us making a few little things up to the point where we have 35 employees, and some of us don't do anything anymore. My title is figurehead. I do still make a few little things for the company though. And my wife does, she weaves all the sashes. And my daughter, who is the third owner, my 2 sons and my oldest daughter, own this business. I own the building. They lease it to me, that's part of my retirement. But, or they lease it, I lease it to the company. But anyway, so things have really changed over the years, and one of the things I wanted to do, we started putting out a flyer or catalog back in the late 70s, and it eventually evolved in the next few years into a full-blown catalog. And now, I don't know if that's the last one or not.
Oh, that's correct, yes.
Yeah, that's the last one.
Says 33 on April 4th.
Yeah. Well, that's how many years we've been putting out a catalog. Some of the first ones were really, really crude. And we've honed it over the years to where I think we put out one of the better catalogs in the country. I think it's on par with LL Bean and Neiman Marcus and some of those others. That may sound like quite a brag, but if you look at it, it's of that quality. Better than LL Bean's catalog. Anyway, so we have done quite a bit, and one of the things that I wanted to do from the beginning was develop this to the point where when a person walked in the door, we could dress them from head to foot and send them out fully dressed as they would be dressed as a colonial person. And we have achieved that easily for men, women, and children. And that's doing all 3 of those and having all the stuff from head to toe is quite an accomplishment, because there's things like shoes. You just don't go out and buy shoes like we have to have. And hats, we make our own hats. Mainly because if you go buy a felt hat, the brim is too short. We have to have brims that are this wide. So we make our own hats, and we have our shoes. We own the shoe lasts and the cutting patterns, and we have a shoe company in Pennsylvania make our shoes. And during the Gulf War, they were making combat boots for the Army, and we thought, there goes our shoe source. And but we have gone through 3 or 4 shoemakers, and that continually happens in this business because we outlive some of the people that make things for us. You know, in 40-year time period, your suppliers just plain die off sometimes. Not that I'm too far from that myself, but you know, it's I don't think this is going to go away anytime soon with my 2 sons running it. Shannon here, Shannon is my youngest son's brother-in-law. So just about, you can't swing a dead cat around here without hitting a relative. But anyway, we have a very low turnover in our business. We don't hire very often, and we don't lay people off. We have, I think in all the times that we've been in business, we have fired 1 person. And that's, in 40 years' time, that's pretty good. I had a guy tell me once, there's a place for everybody, you just have to find it. but we have some pretty good people working for us. The catalog is a good example because the guy that did the cover just needed a part-time job to get by for a while. And went to church with my son, and they started kind of working for us, and now he's a vital part of the business, you know. It's just one of those things that happens. Before you all leave, you can all take a catalog. We've got piles of them in the back room.
Another bundle, so we've got enough here.
Yeah. But this building is not just a store or a warehouse, but a lot of it is a workshop. And if you want, go down to the dungeon, and which is right below your feet. But these buildings in this half block all burned down in the early 1880s, and so everything has been built up since then. And when they did, everything's got stone foundations, no cement blocks.
So let me ask you a question.
Go ahead.
If you said you're equipped, somebody walks in off the street, you can dress them, send them out. Is that advisable for somebody to come in to be fitted correctly? Or is it more accurate than just floating out a catalog?
Well, it really doesn't make a whole lot of difference, but some of the things that we have to be custom made. Knee breeches are a very good example because you have a waist measurement, you have an inseam which goes down to here, size around your calf, and sometimes the rise, depending on some guys that are kind of portly have a different rise. So,
If I may, it is best to come in and be measured, especially if you can catch the people who make the stuff. But the next best thing to that is we've got a detailed diagram of how and where you measure in the catalog so that you're not really guessing. So follow the instructions, you're good. If you can, it's good to.
The other thing, I attended the state meeting of the SAR, it's held up in Chesterton, northwest corner part of the state, and most people came in period costume. And what surprised me is they all look like farmers. They all look like just everyday Joes coming out of the fields. Very few people had uniforms, and they said because they were with militia groups or they were just, some of them wore like hunters' outfits.
yeah.
You know.
Well, if you, during the first part of the American Revolution, there were almost no uniforms. So George Washington said, dress everybody in a hunting frock, and at least that'll give you some kind of uniformity. So that's one of the things. If you look through our catalog, you don't see anything that I would classify as a uniform. Now, we make military hats.
This one?
We make military coats. But what else is uniform?
That's a continental uniform.
Well, yes and no. If you were a colonel, you wouldn't wear that. You wouldn't wear that. You'd be wearing knee breeches. Almost everybody in the Revolutionary War wore knee breeches. If you went to a blacksmith shop, you wouldn't be wearing long trousers. The people who wore long trousers were farmers and slaves and sailors, and sometimes not sailors. We make a special pants for sailors. But the uniforms were basically a waistcoat and a coat and hat. And the knee breeches were basically white knee breeches. And the uniforms, believe it or not, the British didn't always wear red. And we didn't always wear blue either. So you can tell what a unit is from across the field by what they're wearing. Brown coat with red facings might be the 2nd Maryland, and things like that. So making military coats is almost a field to itself because there's so much variety. You can't make, the pattern may be the same, but the material is going to be a different color.
I had to get mine at Weeping Heart down in Kentucky.
Okay, he's very good. I've known him for a number of years.
The other thing I noticed were the hats they wore. You know, I was expecting to do all wearing these tricolor hats.
Not necessarily.
And some of them had the brim cocked up on just one side.
Right.
And one of them said, well, that's because that's that side where I carry my rifle.
Like this.
Yeah, sort of like that, just cocked up on one side.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes the brims were a little rather narrow and sometimes they were a little wider, so even that varies.
And then and can you tell us what, when they cocked it up, did they pin it with something in particular or just whatever they had handy?
Well, usually, well, I can show you some, I think. We may have some in the other room.
I'm just wondering if it was, if whatever they pinned it up was associated with their group or militia or...
No, not necessarily. Yes and no. Because they usually had a cockade, but it was held up by something else, some cords. And the military hat, sometimes the tricorn, sometimes it was made, you'll see some of them that have hanging out the sides a tassel. That's because it's tied in the back, and if you untie it, and you can let the sides down to protect you from the sun.
Okay.
You know, there's just a lot of variety.
I think the whole point I just